In the autumn of 1878, the Colorado Territory was a land of silver strikes and sudden fortunes, where mining claims changed hands at gunpoint and where a man's life was worth less than the ore he could pull from the ground. The jagged peaks of the Rockies stood sentinel over valleys where lawlessness reigned and justice was dispensed from the barrel of a gun. It was in this unforgiving country that Captain Samuel "Deadeye" Krenshaw discovered that 25 years of military service and a reputation as the finest marksman west of the Mississippi meant nothing when faced with the greed of his own commanding officers. The first snow of the season dusted the mountain passes as Krenshaw rode patrol with his small detachment of cavalry. His weathered face, lined with the stories of countless campaigns, remained impassive as he surveyed the terrain. At 49, his once black hair had surrendered to steel gray, but his eyes, those legendary eyes that could spot movement at 1,000 yards, remained sharp as ever. Krenshaw had earned his nickname during the Indian Wars, where his ability to place a rifle shot at impossible distances had saved countless cavalry patrols and earned him the respect of both his men and his enemies. The Ute called him the man who kills from yesterday, believing he could fire a shot so true it traveled back in time. The Apache simply called him Death's Eye and gave his patrols wide berth when possible. At 49, he was a career soldier who'd served with distinction from the Civil War through the Apache campaigns, a man whose word was his bond and whose loyalty to the Army was absolute. He'd turned down offers of promotion that would have taken him east to Washington, preferring the honest dangers of frontier duty to the political machinations of the capital. That loyalty proved to be his downfall when he stumbled upon a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of territorial command. It began with discrepancies in the quartermaster's logs, ammunition counts that didn't match firing reports, rifles listed as damaged that never appeared for repair. Small things, easily dismissed as clerical errors, but Krenshaw had spent too many years managing military supplies to believe in coincidences. "Sir, with respect, these numbers don't add up," he told Major Harrington, his immediate superior. "We're missing enough ammunition to fight a small war." "Paperwork, Captain," Harrington had replied with a dismissive wave. "Always errors in paperwork. I'll look into it." But Harrington never did, and the discrepancies continued. Krenshaw might have let it go if not for the ambush that killed 12 of his men 3 weeks later. The patrol had been hit hard by a band of renegades armed with weapons that no raiding party should have possessed, new Springfield rifles that fired true and hit hard. The scheme was elegant in its simplicity. Army officers were selling weapons and ammunition to hostile Indian tribes, then using the resulting raids as justification for increased military appropriations from Washington. The profits were enormous, and the cover was perfect. Who would suspect the very men charged with protecting settlers of arming their enemies? Krenshaw discovered the operation by accident when he found a cache of stolen Army rifles in an abandoned mine shaft near Fort Collins. The shaft, supposedly played out years ago, had been converted into a temporary storage depot. The serial numbers on the crates matched weapons reported lost in the recent Indian attack on his supply convoy, an attack that had killed 12 soldiers under his command, men whose faces he still saw in his dreams, men who had trusted him to lead them safely home. He'd been careless in his investigation, too trusting of the chain of command. When he brought his evidence to Colonel Marcus Whitfield, the fort commander, he realized too late that Whitfield himself was orchestrating the operation. "You should have minded your own business, Captain," Colonel Whitfield had said as his hired guns worked Krenshaw over with rifle butts and cavalry sabers in the abandoned mine. A smart man would have taken his cut and kept his mouth shut. Whitfield stood watching, his immaculate uniform a stark contrast to the brutal scene unfolding before him. A West Point graduate with political connections, Whitfield had never seen real combat, advancing through the ranks on charm and family influence rather than merit. A smart man wouldn't have sold weapons to the same savages who killed his own troops. Krenshaw had replied through broken teeth, earning himself another beating that left him with 3 cracked ribs and a dislocated shoulder. Your problem, Krenshaw, is that you never understood how the world really works, Whitfield said, lighting a cigar as his men continued their work. The frontier is changing. There's money to be made in this transition, and only fools stand on principle when fortune beckons. They'd stripped him of his uniform, his weapons, and his horse, then dumped him in the wilderness 50 miles from the nearest settlement. The plan was simple. Let the elements finish what they'd started, and report Captain Krenshaw as another casualty of Indian raiders. One more name on a long list of soldiers who'd given their lives to tame the frontier. For 5 days, Krenshaw stumbled through the Rocky Mountain foothills, his cavalry training the only thing keeping him alive. The beating had left him with internal injuries that made each step agony, but the thought of Whitfield profiting from the deaths of his men drove him forward. He ate pine nuts and drank from mountain streams, following game trails and staying ahead of the early winter storms that could kill a man in minutes. The nights were the worst. As temperatures plummeted, he huddled in makeshift shelters, fighting to keep the small flame of his life from being extinguished. Twice he woke to find mountain lions circling his camp, drawn by the scent of blood and weakness. Only his experience and the Colt revolver he'd managed to conceal in his boot, his last possession from his military life, kept the predators at bay. On the 6th day, half-frozen and delirious from hunger and infection, he collapsed outside a remote trading post built into the side of a canyon wall. Through vision, blurred with fever, he saw the structure as if in a dream. Log walls reinforced with stone, smoke curling from a chimney cut into the living rock of the canyon. The last thing he remembered was the sound of a woman's voice speaking in accented English, and gentle hands pulling him toward warmth and safety. When he awoke 3 days later, Krenshaw found himself in the care of Marie-Claire Dubois, a French-Canadian woman who operated the most successful trading post between Denver and Santa Fe. At 35, she was a striking woman with auburn hair and green eyes that missed nothing, who spoke 4 languages fluently and could outshoot most men with either rifle or pistol. "Bonjour, mon capitaine," she said with a slight smile as he struggled to sit up on the bearskin-covered cot. "You gave us quite a scare. We thought you were going to join your ancestors." The room was warm from a stone fireplace, the walls lined with shelves of supplies and trading goods. Through the window, Krenshaw could see the canyon walls rising steep and protective around the trading post. "Where am I?" he managed, his voice a rasp from disuse and thirst. "Devil's Canyon Station," she replied, offering him water from a tin cup. "My home and business. You arrived more dead than alive 6 days ago." 6 days? Krenshaw tried to rise but fell back as pain lanced through his chest. "Careful," Marie-Claire cautioned. "You had 2 broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder, and enough bruises to suggest you argued with a grizzly bear." Her eyes narrowed. "Though bears don't usually use rifle butts or cavalry sabers." Marie-Claire's story emerged slowly as Krenshaw recovered. She'd come west with her trapper husband, following the fur trade into the remotest corners of the Rockies. When he'd been killed in an avalanche 5 years earlier, she'd refused to return to civilization, instead building her trading post into the most important supply depot in the region. "The mountains don't care if you're a woman," she explained as she showed him around her operation once he could walk again. "They only care if you're strong enough to survive them." Her trading post, Devil's Canyon Station, was carved directly into the canyon wall, with natural caves providing storage and protection from both weather and hostile visitors. She employed a mixed crew of French voyageurs, Mexican vaqueros, and former soldiers who'd found civilian life too tame for their tastes. Pierre Lafitte, her second-in-command, was a giant of a man who had once trapped with her husband. His massive beard couldn't hide the scar that ran from his left eye to his jaw, the result of a grisly attack that had become legendary in mountain folklore. Miguel Ortega, her chief scout, had been a cavalry scout before deserting rather than participate in a massacre of peaceful Ute. And Thomas Three-Finger Jenkins, who managed her accounts, had been a Philadelphia banker before losing his fortune and 2 fingers in a financial panic. They were outcasts and misfits, but under Marie-Claire's leadership, they had built something remarkable. A place where the code of the mountains superseded the prejudices of civilization. As Crenshaw's strength returned, he told Marie-Claire about the conspiracy, the betrayal, and his determination to see justice done. She listened without judgment, occasionally nodding as if she'd heard similar stories before. "These officers," she said finally, pouring him a measure of whiskey as they sat before the fire, "they think their uniforms make them untouchable? They think their rank puts them above the law," Krenshaw replied, the firelight casting his face in harsh relief. "They're about to learn different." "And how will one man, beaten and left for dead, teach this lesson?" she asked, not unkindly. Krenshaw stared into his glass. "I don't know yet, but I owe it to my men to try." Their partnership began when a patrol from Fort Collins arrived at the trading post, ostensibly searching for renegade Indians, but actually looking for any sign that Krenshaw had survived. Marie-Claire's network of trappers and traders had already brought word of increased military activity in the region, and her sharp eyes quickly identified the real purpose of the patrol. "They're not hunting Indians," she observed as they watched the soldiers through her spyglass from a hidden overlook above the canyon. "They're hunting you." The patrol was led by Lieutenant James Harker, a young officer Krenshaw recognized as one of Whitfield's protégés. As Marie-Claire's people served the soldiers coffee and offered supplies, Krenshaw watched from hiding, noting how Harker's questions always circled back to travelers who might have passed through recently. "They're afraid," Marie-Claire said when the patrol finally departed. "Afraid you survived and might expose them." "Fear makes men dangerous," Krenshaw replied. "They'll be back and in greater numbers." Crenshaw's military knowledge and Marie-Claire's understanding of the local terrain made them a formidable team. They began gathering evidence of the conspiracy, using her trading connections to track the flow of stolen weapons and his contacts among honest soldiers to identify the corrupt officers. Through the winter months, as snow closed the high passes and isolated the canyon, they built their case. Marie-Claire's traders brought back reports of army weapons in Indian camps, while Krenshaw drafted detailed accounts of the supply discrepancies he'd discovered. Three-Finger Jenkins used his financial expertise to follow the money trail, uncovering bank accounts in Denver where Whitfield and his conspirators were depositing their profits. But it wasn't just an investigation. As they worked together, Krenshaw and Marie-Claire discovered in each other kindred spirits. People who had found their purpose in the wilderness, who understood that true strength came not from power over others, but from remaining true to one's principles. "Why did you stay?" Krenshaw asked her one evening as they sat on the canyon rim, watching the stars emerge in the mountain sky. "After your husband died, why not return to Montreal?" Marie-Claire was silent for a long moment. "Because this is where I found myself," she finally answered. "In the city, I was Jean-Paul's wife, nothing more. Here I am myself, complete, whole. The mountains stripped away everything false and left only what matters." She turned to him. "Is that not why you chose the frontier as well?" The confrontation came in early spring when Colonel Whitfield arrived at Devil's Canyon with a full company of soldiers, claiming to be investigating reports of illegal weapons sales. But Krenshaw was ready for them, and he wasn't alone. "Well, Captain," Whitfield called out as his men surrounded the trading post. "You're harder to kill than I expected." "And you're exactly as corrupt as I suspected," Krenshaw replied, stepping out with his hands near his guns. Behind him, Marie-Claire's crew took positions with rifles and shotguns, while trappers and traders who owed her their lives appeared on the canyon rims, weapons trained on the soldiers below. "You're outnumbered, Krenshaw," Whitfield said, though his confident tone had faltered at the sight of the defenders. "Be reasonable. There's still a place for you in this enterprise." "I've seen what your enterprise costs," Krenshaw replied. 12 good men dead so you could line your pockets. That debt comes due today." The battle was fierce but brief. Crenshaw's marksmanship was legendary for good reason, and Marie-Claire's people were seasoned fighters who knew every inch of the canyon. When the smoke cleared, Whitfield and his conspirators were dead, while the honest soldiers who'd been deceived by their officers helped gather evidence of the conspiracy. The scandal rocked the territorial government and led to reforms that cleaned up military corruption throughout the West. Krenshaw was offered reinstatement with full honors, but he declined. choosing instead to stay with Marie-Claire and help her expand her trading empire. "You could have your career back," she said as they stood on the canyon rim, watching the sunrise paint the peaks gold and crimson. "The general himself offered to restore your rank." "I've got something better," Krenshaw replied, taking her hand in his scarred one. "I've got a future worth fighting for." In the years that followed, Devil's Canyon Station became legendary throughout the Rockies, a place where honest dealing was guaranteed, where travelers could find safety and supplies, and where two people who'd been written off by society proved that the strongest partnerships are forged in the crucible of shared adversity. The mountains that had nearly claimed Samuel Crenshaw's life instead gave him purpose, partnership, and the chance to use his skills for something greater than mere survival. And Marie-Claire Dubois found that the wilderness she'd mastered alone was even more rewarding when shared with someone who understood that true strength came not from rank or title, but from the courage to stand up for what was right. Together, they built not just a trading empire, but a legacy that would endure long after the last silver mine played out and the last cavalry patrol rode into history. A testament to the proposition that even in the harshest wilderness, justice and honor could take root and flourish if tended by those with the courage to defend them.